What flies do you actually need in your fly box? And how do you know which ones to take with you so you're not stuffing every box you own into your pack? I used to take every single fly box I owned with me to the river every time I went fishing until I learned one of my most valuable fly fishing lessons: understanding when certain aquatic insects are most active. If you understand that, you can hit the water with a handful of flies, some extra tippet, and catch plenty of fish. On today's show, I'll walk you through my own personal fly boxes, the patterns I always carry with me, and how you can pick the right fly every time. This is Untangled, fly fishing for everyone, presented by Ventures Fly Co. Hey everybody, welcome to it. This is Untangled. I'm your host, Spencer Durant. To start off our show today about how to know what flies you actually need to take with you to the river, I want to tell y'all a little story. I used to fish with this guy nicknamed Mysis Mike, like the Mysis shrimp that you get in some tailwaters here in the West. Mike's kind of feller who could catch fish out of a storm drain. Honestly, I'm surprised he didn't do it in front of me sometimes. The guy was just a magician, what he could do with a fly rod, likely still is. I haven't talked to Mike in a while, and I need to call him. Mike, if you're listening, I'm going to call you, I promise. So he's this fantastic angler, and it makes it even better. He always used an old Cabela's Three Forks rod. It was one of their entry-level rods. I don't know if they even make it anymore, but that was all he was using, that, and then he had an old Fluger Medalist reel from the 80s, and I watched him land a 35-inch cutthroat on that setup once. The guy was just, like I said, the best description for him was a magician, what Mysis Mike could do. Anyways, one thing I remember about Mike is he always just had two fly boxes in his vest. That's it. This guy that could outfish anybody, two fly boxes. That's all he's got. And I remember it was a winter day. We were fishing the Lower Provo together. This was years ago when the best part of the Lower Provo was still public and you could still get onto it. And Mike was catching fish left and right, as was usual for him. And of course, as was usual for me back in the day, I was on the struggle bus. I was having a heck of a time. I couldn't get a drift. I couldn't do anything. I just wasn't doing anything right. So I waltzed over to Mike, and at the time thinking, oh, well, obviously it's my fly that's wrong and not anything else. And fly choice probably had a little bit to do with it, but there's a lot more going on with me at the time that was wrong with my fly fishing. But I waltzed over to Mike and I asked him what fly he was using. So he pulls out one of his two fly boxes. It wasn't very big, maybe 60 flies total, was all that was in there. And he points this little multicolored midge pattern and says, oh yeah, the fish are eating this. They're gobbling it up. So I start rifling through my boxes. I think I had 7 or 8 fly boxes with me, and I didn't have anything at all like that little midge. I had probably over 1,000 flies with me, but I didn't have that little midge. Now, of course, Mike let me borrow one, and he showed me a few pointers on what I was doing wrong, and I caught some fish. But that stuck with me because it was the first time I realized just how much extra junk I was carrying with me to the river, and it's the first time that I remember thinking analytically about the flies that I have in my box. And specifically, I started wondering, well, how did Mike pick the few patterns that were in his boxes? Again, he didn't have a whole ton of flies. So how did he know what to do? How did he know what to pick? Was it just luck? Was it skill? Was it that old guy wisdom? Mike's, what is he? 30-something, 20-something years older than me. He's older than me enough that I could call him an old guy and wonder if he had that old guy wisdom. It seems they always know, oh yeah, that's a 5/8 wrench for that. Or, oh, no, you need this kind of fitting for that piece of pipe. They know those things, and it's unfair. You wonder, how did that old guy know that stuff? And then you get older and you realize it's in the old man DNA. Anyways, fast forward about a decade, and I found the answer to that question. It's actually pretty simple. It's just experience. That's what Mike had, and at the time that Mike and I were fishing together, I didn't have nearly enough. to stock my boxes the way that Mike did. And it's kind of funny because I've turned into Mike in a lot of ways these days too. I fish a lot of the same way that he did, and I don't have very many fly boxes anymore. I've got 2 small fly boxes of nymphs, a box of dry flies, and then a box of emergers, and that's it. Other than my tippet, my float, and my bobbers, and split shot, that's all I ever keep in my chest pack for those 4 fly boxes. But how do I know? How did I gain that experience to know which flies to put in my boxes and what patterns are in there? I'm sure folks listening to the show right now, I'm sure you're wondering, what patterns do I have in there? And how did Mike come to that knowledge? How did I get it? And most importantly, how do you get it? How do you get that old guy wisdom? Well, you just got to get old. Old, grow a beard, get grumpy. No, you don't have to do any of that. It stems from using that experience you get fishing to understand the basics of when certain aquatic insects are active. Insects are going to make up the majority of every trout's diet. Yes, they're going to eat worms, they'll eat scuds, leeches, they'll eat other fish too, but insects are the majority of what they eat, like me with wings and Diet Coke. That's 90% of what I eat. That's why I look so good, so svelte on camera. Especially, you put me next to Alex and you're like, oh yeah, he definitely eats wings and Diet Coke. Look at that physique. Oh, but kidding aside, right? For example, it's late September right now when this show is coming out, and I know that here in my neck of the woods, going back to when are aquatic insects active, I know that right now the caddis, the trichos, and the hoppers, that's what's on the menu. That's what fish want to eat. That's what they are gobbling down. But does that hold true for where you live? And how do you even find out which bugs are active where you live? Well, luckily for us fly anglers, most trout rivers have the same bugs and the same hatch timings all over the world. That makes things pretty nice, pretty nice for us. There might be some slight differences. There are mayflies that hatch back east that we just don't have here in the West. The Hexagenia mayflies, the real big sons of guns that hatch in the Midwest and out towards the east. We don't get those here in the West. But so you're going to see some differences. You're going to see it's not completely, what hatches on the Madison is what's going to hatch on the Delaware. It's not completely apples to apples like that. But by and large, the bugs are going to follow a schedule. Okay. When you get caddis hatches out here, there should be caddis hatches in the east. Again, going to be slight differences, but they're going to follow these general rules of thumb. Now, I'm actually going to go over this schedule of when these bugs hatch, and then I'm going to tell you what flies I've got in my box to imitate those bugs, and we'll go to that point. So, first things first, midges. They hatch year-round. They are available to fish year-round. So you always want to have midges in your box. This is their staple food. Kind of like when I was a kid, my mom's got pictures of my baby pictures hanging up. I just recently went home to see my parents for a few days, and they live about 12 hours away from here. So it's a trip to go see them. And I was looking at the baby pictures on the wall, and my mom's got the ones of me. I looked like the Michelin tire man, but in baby form. I was fat, and fat rolls everywhere because all I ate was potatoes. That was the staple of my life as a baby. And that's what midges are to trout, is the potatoes. it is their staple. Fish are always going to eat midges. I can't stress enough the importance of having midges in your fly box. Then you're going to get mayflies. Those are going to hatch from about mid-spring through late fall. But the species of mayflies that hatch at certain times are going to be different. Blue-winged olives, for example, those will hatch from about late March through May. And then PMDs, your pale morning duns, those will start coming off in June, July, and August. And then blue-winged olives come back in mid-fall. Drakes, that's a species of mayfly. They're part of the mayfly family. They hatch from around May through August. You'll get some drake hatches. Stoneflies, another major group of bugs. They're active from June through August, but their peak is June and July, and stoneflies are most prevalent in western rivers. You will get some winter stonefly hatches back east, but that's enough of an event, and they're big enough that if you're out fishing in the winter and you see a winter stonefly, it's going to be very obvious what it is because it's so much bigger than all the midges that are coming off. And that holds true for out in the west as well. Caddis, they are going to hatch from early summer all the way through mid-fall. You'll get them into October. That's where the October caddis gets its name from, I would imagine, because it comes off in October generally. And then you'll have terrestrials like grasshoppers. They're active from about late summer through the first big frost in fall. Other terrestrials like your cicadas, your ants, or your beetles, you're generally going to see them available from early summer to about early fall when that first frost hits. And then, of course, you got your worms, scuds, sow-bugs, and leeches that are available year-round, and those are great staple flies to fall back on if the fish just aren't keyed in on insects for whatever reason. Your worms, scuds, sow-bugs, and leeches, that's usually always going to get a fish to move. I know those aren't technically aquatic insects, but we group them in here because they're flies that we use anyways. It really is that simple. That took me, 5 minutes? It would have been quicker if I hadn't gone off on the tangent about how I love potatoes as a baby because, you come to the Untangled podcast for the hard-hitting journalistic fly fishing information and stories about when Durant was a baby. That's what you're here for. It really is that simple, though, folks. These are the bugs that are available to trout, roughly in those time frames. So when you're out fly fishing, you should have patterns to represent those flies in your box in relative abundance. That should be your focus. Of course, I'm not going to leave it there. I'm actually going to go ahead and tell y'all what flies I've got in my box. This is an actual look into my box. I wrote this all down. I popped my boxes open, and I wrote down what was in there and put it in the show. So this is an honest-to-goodness look at what I've got in my box. I'll tell you what those flies imitate, what these patterns imitate, why I like these patterns so much, and then I'll give you a little bit of information about how I organize these flies as well. So starting us off, I organize this list just by dries, emergers, and then nymphs. So we'll start off with our dries. And the first dry fly is the one and only, the tried and true, the venerable Parachute Adams. I love this fly. It's a great bug to imitate mayflies. You can even tie them larger to imitate drakes in a pinch. It's just a do-it-all fly. It can imitate just about anything. I absolutely love them, and I keep them in my box from size 10 all the way to size 18. I never go anywhere, do any kind of fishing without a Parachute Adams. I have caught fish all the way from Alaska to Arizona on Parachute Adams. They are the go-to. I love that fly. Cannot have enough of them. Next up is our elk hair caddis. This imitates an adult caddis. I like these in a size 12 to 16. They're a fantastic fly for the top fly in a dry dropper rig during the summer, and then obviously you can fish them by themselves all the time. I've got Parachute blue-winged olives to imitate our blue-winged olive mayfly adults in sizes 16 through 20. I've got Parachute pale morning duns to imitate your pale morning dun adults, size 14 to 16 for those. And then I've got a good selection of chubby Chernobyls. I use the chubby to imitate hoppers. I like these in a size 8 to 12. They work to imitate adult stoneflies in a pinch. If you absolutely need it, they can pass for that. That's not my go-to, but if I'm completely out of stonefly adults for whatever reason, a chubby can get the job done. I also have cicadas in my box year-round, and I keep those in a size 10 to 12. That's kind of interesting, but the reason I keep cicadas in there is when they start coming off, usually in my neck of the woods, we get them late May, early June. From then all the way through the end of July, sometimes even into August, the fish will still eat cicadas around here. And everywhere that I've fished in the West, I've been able to get fish to eat cicadas. They also look enough like a beetle. Sometimes I think that's why the fish will eat them. They're also just a great top fly for a dry dropper rig, especially if it's really hot and there's a lot of terrestrials on the water. Sometimes they'll just come eat the cicada. It's not a go-to. I'll usually put a hopper on if I'm fishing terrestrials, but the cicada works sometimes, and I use it often enough that my cicadas just stay in my box year-round. That's why I made the list. And speaking of our bigger terrestrials, I'll also have some foam-bodied golden stoneflies in sizes 8 to 10. And it really holds true for the stones as well with the cicadas. The stonefly season lasts longer, and I'll fish them a lot longer than I will the cicadas. But once they start coming off in June, I can fish them all the way through August and catch fish on them still. So I keep them around. I've also got some elk hair stimulators in the box. This is a good all-around attractor pattern. It doesn't really imitate any one fly in particular, but it can work for stoneflies. It can pass as a salmon fly when needed. It can also work as a hopper if there's terrestrials and you don't have a foam hopper. You can throw this elk hair stimulator out there. It's not the best hopper imitation, but it can work in a pinch, and I like these in a size 8 to 10. I've got Griffiths gnats in the box too, in sizes 18 down to 22, and I use these for small midge hatches. They'll work well. They're kind of an attractor pattern, but I've had some fantastic days during mayfly hatches while fishing with a Griffiths gnat, but the fish can't be too picky. If you're on a tailwater, they'll probably turn their nose up at a Griffiths gnat during a mayfly hatch, but elsewhere they'll take it. It's just a good all-purpose small bug. They just work well. I love them. I've also got some Matt's midges in size 18 to 24 for midge hatches. This is a great adult midge pattern. Super easy to tie too. It's my favorite thing about them. They're a piece of cake. It's just thread, a little bit of antron in the hackle, and you're done. I've got some no-see-ums as well in sizes 18 to 22. This is a great little fly for a mayfly or a midge hatch when you need something to sit in the surface film. It works well for both of those. It's kind of an emerger, is what I would classify it as. And then speaking of emergers, I've got Sparkle Duns, size 18 to 22, the absolute best mayfly emerger pattern ever tied. You don't need anything other than a Sparkle Dun, in my opinion. Okay, sometimes you do, but I love Sparkle Duns so much. Alex gives me a little, well, I wouldn't say he gives me a little bit of grief, but there's some friendly joking about how much I love Sparkle Duns. They're just fantastic. They get the job done. I was out fishing yesterday, and there were PMDs coming off, so I tied on a Sparkle Dun, and what do you know? I caught a bunch of big cutthroat. So I never leave home without Sparkle Duns. I absolutely love them. Again, size 18 to 22. I think every trout angler needs these. I've also got Last Chance Cripples in sizes 16, sometimes down to a 20, but usually 16 to 18. I use these during mayfly hatches when the fish want the crippled adult instead of the dun. I've also got a quill-bodied parachute mayfly emerger, and I know that is an absolute mouthful, but I don't have a name for this fly, and I'm not sure if it's an actual real pattern that's tied up in fly shop somewhere or if I just took it from someone, but it's a small bug. I tie it on a size 18 or a size 20 curved hook. I put a quill body on there, a short parachute post. I use some dark olive dubbing for the thorax and then some grizzly hackle to finish it off. It sits low in the water and it works well when the fish want a hyper-realistic emerger. Sometimes that happens. The trout just get picky and they want something that looks very real. That's rare, but it works. And sometimes they just want something that's a bit smaller proportionally than the Sparkle Dun. So that's why I do keep that in the box, because sometimes the Sparkle Dun might just be a little too bulky or a little too long, I think. So they like the smaller bug. I've also got zebra midges, size 16 to 20. All the colors, I don't care. My colors are brown, red, black, and green. That's what I keep. I don't go outside of that, but whatever color you want to tie them in, they're going to be great. You need midge nymphs. This is the best midge nymph in the world. And I would venture outside of a woolly bugger and an elk hair caddis. I bet more trout have been caught on a zebra midge than anything besides those two flies. I've got Frenchies in sizes 12 to 16. They work great as a caddis or a mayfly nymph, and then in larger sizes than that size 12, they work as a stonefly nymph too. They're kind of fantastic that way. I've got hare's ears, size 12 to 18, to imitate my mayflies. I go a little smaller on these than the Frenchies because the Frenchies a little bit tougher to tie in that 18. The hare's ears easier, and they both work well. I've also got Pat's rubber legs. I take these in a size 8 to 12. It is my go-to stonefly nymph pattern. I don't use anything else unless I have to. These Pat's rubber legs are just fantastic. I can't recommend those enough. Really easy to tie too. If you're starting out tying, the Pat's rubber legs a piece of cake to tie up. Now, the only time I don't use a Pat's rubber legs is if I'm using a 2-bit stonefly nymph. I tie those in a size 10 to 12. It's a good golden stonefly nymph. You can change the colors for anything. But I love this if I need more weight than what I have with my Pats. You can tie Pats with a lot of lead underneath them and a tungsten bead, but the 2-bit stonefly is a bulkier pattern anyways, so it just lends itself better to being a little heavier in my opinion. So if I do need more weight, I'll throw a 2-bit stonefly on instead of a Pats and go to town. I've also got some caddis emergers. It's a great caddis emerger that I fish as a nymph. I like that in a size 14 to 16. I do believe the caddis emerger is coming out in our revamped fly collections here at VFC, so stay tuned for that. I've also got some Jujubatus nymphs. It's a realistic mayfly nymph. I like those in a size 16 to 18. I've got scuds in sizes 12 to 18, a great year-round option for trout like we talked about. I've got San Juan worms in size 12 to 14. I don't care about the color. I'll take any color, but I do put a bead on mine just to give them a little bit more weight. We've got an egg bomber as well. This is a proprietary VFC pattern. It's the best egg fly around, sizes 14 to 16, and that one is coming out in our new fly collections once those get updated and rolled out here in a bit. I've got Rainbow Warriors in sizes 16 to 18. It's a great attractor nymph pattern. It just gets the fish's attention. It might look like a midge. It might look like a mayfly nymph. It just grabs their attention, hence the name attractor. And I like having those, especially in the winter. They seem to work really well. And last but not least, I do have quite a few Perdigones in my box. I like those in a size 12 to 16. They're a great mayfly nymph and then another just general attractor pattern as well. And that's it. That's all the flies. Now, that sounds like a lot, but it's actually only 26 patterns. And I usually carry 5 to 6 of each. So that's about 130 flies total. That's it. That doesn't count my streamers because I usually only have a few different streamer patterns anyways. And I don't streamer fish all that much, not as much as I used to. And I only really streamer fish from a boat anymore. And I just take streamers with me when I'm going to go. These flies, these 26 patterns that I mentioned, this is what's currently in my box, in my chest pack that I have with me whenever I'm on the water, no matter what. So that's why I went with these ones. You can easily fit those 130 flies into 2 fly boxes. Heck, most of the fly boxes these days are big enough you could fit 130 into one of them. But I do split mine up a bit differently. I don't just keep 2 boxes. I keep all my nymphs in 2 boxes. I got one that has all my midges, scuds, eggs, and worms, and then all my other nymphs go in another box. I don't know why that split happened. I don't know how that came to be, but that's the split that I've got. So don't read into that one too much. Don't think that you need to do it exactly that way. That's just how I do mine. Then I've got all my emergers in one box, and my emergers and my parachute flies are all in one box. So there's 3 boxes right there. And then all of my foam flies and my hackle-bodied flies, I put those in a small compartment box. And I do that so the hackle on those hackle-bodied flies doesn't get crushed. So 4 boxes in total. I use the old-school tacky boxes. I have some from before tacky was bought by Fish Pond. And then one of our double-sided silicone boxes from VFC. And then that compartment box. That's it. That's literally it. That's all I've got. It's that simple. And I hesitate to use the word guarantee, but I bet if you model your boxes after the way I put mine together, you're going to have what you need for just about 99% of trout fishing. But don't go anywhere though, folks, because coming up next is the Q&A section of this week's show.
Anglers are always asking, what bugs are hatching right now? And that's why we put together a year-round hatch chart. It outlines all the major bug hatches so you always know what fly to tie on, no matter where you're fishing or what time of the year. So if you want to level up your skills and start catching more fish, click or tap the link in the show notes to get this free hatch chart. All right, back to the show.
Untangled runs on questions. Each week, I dedicate half the show to directly answering questions from viewers and listeners, but the questions you send in might inspire the main part of the show as well. There's always a link to submit your questions in the show notes. If you've got a question you would like answered, please send that on in. That's what keeps the lights on here at Untangled. And our first question comes to us from Nevada, the Silver State. We don't get a whole lot of questions from Nevada because they do have Pyramid Lake, but there's not a whole ton of water in Nevada to fly fish. If you've ever been there, you can understand that. But Kevin from Nevada writes in and says, how can you tell the difference between a dry fly and an emerger when you're looking through your flies? Kevin, that's a good, timely question. Appreciate it. Matches what we were talking about on the main part of the show this week. But generally speaking, a dry fly is going to have a full hackle wrapped around the entire fly, either up near the head or around the entire body. In the case of a Griffiths gnat or an elk arcatus, for example, it's got hackle wrapped around the entire body of the fly. Emergers often don't have any hackle, but if they do, it's going to be sparse and probably trimmed flat on the bottom of the fly because the goal is to get that emerger to sit lower in the surface film. So you don't want hackle keeping the fly up too high as it floats. You want it to sit nice and low. And if you look at emergers, you can kind of tell just by looking at them that they're designed to sit low. So that's one giveaway. A lot of emerger patterns also utilize Antron yarn for the wing, the tail, or sometimes even both. And they'll also often use deer or even elk hair that is pushed forward over the eye of the hook, or CDC feathers too. That's become a lot more popular lately. But on dry flies, those materials won't be pushed over the hook eye. They'll be pointing back towards the bend of the hook. So that's another giveaway. That is a generalization, though, and it can help. But the best thing to do would be to organize how you put those flies in your box so you don't forget what's what. So put all your emergers in the same spot so that you learn to recognize the difference between the two. I think that's, if you're struggling to tell them apart, that's probably going to be the best way to help you. So hopefully that helped, Kevin. And thanks so much for sending your question on in. Jeremy from Utah has got our next question. Writes in, it says, Spencer, can't thank you enough for this podcast. I fly fished for over 12 years on and off now, but just this year decided I'm all in. Lucky enough, I have the opportunity to fish multiple times per week, so I have been on the water a lot lately. I started listening to this podcast about a month ago, so I'm working through each episode. Therefore, my question may have been answered already, but anyways. When wading upriver and you snag your fly in the trees ahead of a hole or line that you're fishing, do you break the line and tie on a new fly to keep fishing that section, then get the fly out of the trees as you move upstream? Or do you carefully try to get your fly without scaring all the fish? Second question, how far upstream do you cast when working the river? Loving the show and can't thank Ventures Flyco enough for the masterclass videos. It has helped me to improve my fishing skills and learn how to get more fish. Jeremy, thanks for listening. Thanks for the kind words as well. I appreciate it. The whole team here at VFC loves to hear that. Thank you. I'll tackle your question about snagging first. What I do when I snag really depends on if I'm by myself or if I'm fishing with other people. When me and Alex fish with his dad, he's got a funny thing. He'll call it, if you get snagged up at all, he'll call it being in the penalty box. So if he gets snagged up, he'll say, oh, I'm in the penalty box and it's your turn. And he'll let me or Alex go through and fish. It's just kind of funny. But what happens when the three of us are fishing together is if I got snagged, for example, then I'll get out of the way and make room so that Alex or his dad can fish the hole if it's just too good of a spot to not walk through and spook all the fish, or just break the fly off and re-rig. That's what we'll do when there's multiple people. When I'm by myself, though, I usually just walk through the hole and grab my flies. I would rather sacrifice the hole instead of losing flies because I spend a lot of time tying those flies and I don't want to lose them. I'm a cheapskate and I just don't like to lose flies. That's my personal preference. I'll sacrifice the hole. I know not everybody feels that way, and that's completely fine. That's just what I do. But on the subject of snagging, before we move on, often if you don't immediately yank on the snag, but if you let your line go slack a little bit, and then you wiggle the fly line up and down, the flies will pop right out. I was on the water just yesterday, and that happened to me. I got my fly stuck on a bush across the river, and instead of just yanking immediately, I just gave it a little bit of slack, wiggled, and the flies popped right out. And it's actually best to never yank with your rod, because especially if you get snagged and you immediately just start yanking, you're probably just going to make the snag or tangle worse, and you're probably going to break the line anyways if you do that. But it's also not good for your rod, because fly rods aren't designed to handle that sort of stress of that consistent yank. They're designed to handle fish and turning over flies and whatnot. So if you yank too hard on your fly rod like that, you can actually break it. You can stress the blank to the point where it will break eventually. A lot of the breaks, I'm lucky to have a few friends who work for fly rod companies, and a lot of the breaks they repair are because people just yank on their rods all the time. So make sure to get out of the habit of doing that, and you'll thank yourself a ton. Now, as to your second question, you said, how far do you cast up the river when you're fishing? Well, it depends. And this is a mindset question. We've talked about this a lot on the show lately, where if you really want to succeed as a fly fisher, you've got to have the right mindset. You've got to come into this thinking the right way and being willing and able to approach problems and solve them without a rigid, clearly defined structure. Because remember, when you get out there on the water, when you want to focus on that concept of fishing close to far. So if I get to a great run, let's say it's 50 feet long, I don't just throw a cast to the top of it first. I fish the bottom half first, and then once I've caught the fish that were there, or I've decided the fish aren't there, or they're just not eating, that's when I move on to the top half. Okay, the piece of water that I'm fishing dictates how far my cast is going to be. If you go into it with that rigid attitude that I mentioned earlier, where you're thinking, all right, I've got to cast 30 feet upstream, manage the drift, and repeat. If that's your attitude, you're going to have a hard time catching fish, because fly fishing isn't a rigid, locked-in sport that has a series of do X, do Y, and get Z as a result. That just doesn't happen with fly fishing. Everything is always different. It's always changing, and that means your approach to the water will always be different. That's an extremely important lesson to keep in mind, and something I can't harp on enough. So do your best to remember that it's not this locked in, rigid formula. And I think you remember that, you're going to be surprised at how much better you do out there on the water. But thanks, Jeremy, for sending that question in. I appreciate it. Micah from Utah has our next question. Writes in and says, hey, Spencer, I've been listening to the podcast since the beginning and love the show. I'm a huge fan of EFC and fish a fly flinger and love it. I'm looking at getting some new sunglasses to replace my gas station pair I've been using. I want to know what color / type of lenses I should get. I know I want polarized sunglasses, but do I want a mirror finish? Amber, blue, green, silver, black, what color? I mainly fish mountain streams and some of the tailwaters around me. Thanks for answering my question. Micah, good question. Thanks for sending that in, man. And thanks for listening from the beginning. It was a rough start to Untangled. It wasn't that rough, but you do. This is what, episode 94? You do something 94 times. Hopefully you're going to improve a little bit. And I go back and I look it up, episode 1 or something, and I just think, oh my gosh, how did I get any listeners? It was rough. I didn't know what I was doing. I still don't, but I'm a little bit better at pretending now. Oh, anyways, sunglasses. Everyone should wear sunglasses on the water. There's absolutely zero reason not to. First off, it's going to protect your eyes. It's going to reduce the strain on your eyes. So from an eye health standpoint, do it. All right? There's absolutely no reason to not wear them. Second, fly hooks. They're flying by your face at a substantial speed. You don't want one to come back and get you in the eye. I actually had my eye saved by a pair of sunglasses because I got snagged and I was pulling on the snag and it popped back and flew right back in my face and hit my sunglasses. If I hadn't been wearing my sunglasses, it would have gone right into my eye and I might have lost the eye. So, and I'm sure a lot of anglers have stories just like that. So wear your sunglasses. There's absolutely no reason to not have them. I'm not telling you to go spend $300 on a fancy pair. I'm telling you to wear them. Okay. Absolutely. They're a critical part of your gear. You need to have them. Another thing that you need with sunglasses is they've got to be polarized. Again, you don't need to spend a whole ton of money, but you need a polarized set of lenses. The polarized lenses are going to cut a lot of the glare off the water, and that's going to help you see into the water better and spot fish. That's how you become a fish spotting ninja, right? They're an absolute must-have. You need polarized lenses. My favorite lens for all-around trout fishing is going to be either amber or brown or copper. The mirrored lenses are nice because they do deflect a bit more of the light, but they're a little darker. So personally, I would opt to not have a mirrored lens because it lets you have a little bit more light. Those amber or brown or copper, that seems to be the best compromise I've found between bringing down the glare on the water, but not making things too dark. Now, that said, I have been playing around with the new Smith Hook set sunglasses lately. They sent me those with the brown-green mirror lenses, and those have been phenomenal. Absolutely spectacular shades. A green lens is not going to be a bad idea either. I've used blue, I've used gold, I've used pink, but that amber, brown, copper, that's going to be the sweet spot for trout fishing. That's what I recommend. Again, you do not have to spend a lot of money. A gas station pair that's polarized at the right color is going to work just fine. And there's no reason to spend more than that. But the more expensive sunglasses, they do a better job of enhancing the colors that you see on the water. So you get a better picture, literally. They're going to add a lot more clarity. They're going to be more durable. The lenses themselves are going to be more durable. And there is a significant quality difference between the two. It's up to you to decide if it's worth the cost. For me personally, it is. And Micah, my 2 cents is just get the nice pair of sunglasses. Set the money aside, buy them. They're worth the investment. You're spending all this time out on the water, staring at the water. You got all that reflected light you're dealing with. I just want to keep my eyes in as good a shape as possible, so I'm going to get nice sunglasses. I spent good money on them. All of the ones that I have the little leash on the back so that I don't drop them in the river accidentally. And then I always just keep them in my truck so I never lose them. That's the go-to way to make sure you don't lose them, is keep them on the leash. When you're not wearing them, put them in the truck. I think they're worth it 100%. So that's my recommendation. But thanks a bunch, Micah, for sending that question in. I appreciate it. Rick from Nevada's got our next question. He writes in and says, "Hey, Spencer, my buddy and I went fly fishing this weekend and got on some nice 16 to 18-inch rainbows on a local tailwater. Unfortunately, before we could get them netted, they broke off. This happened 6 times. That is not a joke. We lost 6 fish in a 45-minute to 1-hour time period. Each time it appeared that our knots were failing. We both tie an improved clinch knot. Any tips? Sincerely, a demoralized fly fisher." I like that, Rick. Thank you. And I'm sorry to hear it was so tough. It sounds like you were... that's probably how Alex feels when we go out filming. We were out filming some content, a month ago or so. And we got into this beautiful run, and Alex is running the camera. I'm fishing, and I hooked 4 or 5 fish, and they all either broke me off or got off right in a row. It's so frustrating. So I understand. Anyways, I don't use an improved clinch knot. Every time that I've used it, I feel like the knot's broken. I don't think it's any stronger than a regular clinch knot. In fact, I think it's weaker. I know that's not the experience that a lot of anglers have, but that's my experience with it. I don't use them. Regular old clinch knot is good. When I tie the clinch knot correctly, I do not have any problems with it. So that's what I fish with. I don't see the need for the improved clinch. What probably happened is that when you tied the first part of that improved clinch knot, when you're wrapping the line back around itself, you probably didn't run the tag end around the line enough times. I always do at least 7 times around because that ensures the knot seats well and won't break. When I do that, I never have a problem with my knots. Another potential problem is you might have had a bad batch of tippet when you were tying everything on. The chances of that happening to both of you guys, though, is pretty slim. Sometimes you do just get a bad roll of tippet, and that happens. The only solution at that point is just throw the tippet away. But you also might have had some abrasions, or maybe you had some wear, or maybe the tippet was stretched out a little bit. If you've been fishing it all day or maybe all season and you hadn't changed it out recently, stuff will wear down and break over time. So it's a good idea if you see it to start wearing out to replace your leader and tippet. Another consideration is maybe you were using tippet that was too small. You didn't mention the size. If you were using 6X tippet or even 7X, then yeah, your knots are going to break on a 16-inch fish because you've really got to baby a fish that big with tippet that light. That's another reason that I advocate use 4X all the time. Only use 5 if you absolutely have to, because 4X, you can put some pressure on fish. You get them in quicker, so that's better for the fish, and the knots don't break as often. I can count on one hand how many times I've used 5X lately, and yesterday was the first time since the blue wings quit hatching that I tied 5X on when I was out on the water yesterday, because the water was so low and clear and the bugs were small that I needed 5X. I almost always go with 4. So that's just my 2 cents of what happened, Rick, but hopefully that helps you out, and thank you so much for sending that question in. And with that, folks, we have wrapped up the Q&A section of this week's show, but don't go anywhere. If this were still on the radio, I'd tell you, don't touch that dial, because we've got the Live Real Life section of the show coming right up. Our goal here at VFC is to help anglers live real life by having a fantastic time out on the water. So we dedicate the last portion of every podcast to highlighting the Live Real Life moments from our community. There's a link to submit your own Live Real Life moments in the show notes. And we highly, highly recommend submitting a picture or even video with those so we can share them with everybody. Now, this week's Live Real Life moment comes from a man named Spencer, and he sent a picture on in, and we'll throw that up on the screen if you are watching on YouTube. And if you're listening on audio, I've thrown that picture in the show notes as well, so you can take a look at it. Spencer writes in and says, "This is not a picture of me, rather a picture of my dad. He taught me how to fly fish when I was super young and gave me so much that I could never repay in full. A couple of years ago, my dad was diagnosed with stage 3 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and had about a 50% chance of surviving the next year. He has never been on a drift boat and always talked about it growing up. I made a promise to myself that if he can survive this and is able, I'm going to get a guide and drift our favorite river, the Green. My dad is cancer-free, and I fulfilled my promise last weekend. This is him catching his personal best brown trout during a waiting portion of our float. I learned from this trip that no matter how much time you think you have with your folks, make the most of it now." Spencer, thank you. I appreciate that. That's heartwarming. That's the stuff that matters, right? All this other stuff, it's fun, but it's just fishing. It doesn't matter in grand scheme of things. This is stuff that actually matters. So thank you so much for sending that in. I appreciate it. And congrats to your dad for getting through and getting the fish and getting through cancer. That's awesome. And I second that. I feel the same way about my dad. I could never pay him back with what he's given me. So props to you for going through and doing what you can to pay your dad back. And, speaking from experience, seeing this is what my dad tells me. He says, seeing my kids run off and do well and be happy is all the payment in the world. So definitely feel that way too, Spencer. Don't forget that. You're doing some good stuff with yourself. And I appreciate you sending that in. Thank you so much. And with that, folks, we are going to end the show. Thank you so much for being with us this week. We appreciate it. Can't do anything that we do here at VFC without you, our viewers and listeners. If you've got questions that you would like answered on the show, or you've got a live real life moment you want to send in, there is a link to do that in the show notes. In addition, if you could, please rate and subscribe to the show wherever you listen to it. The more ratings and subscriptions we get means more and more folks see the show, and that we can help more and more people get out there and live real life. And speaking of getting out there, we've still got some good fishing ahead of us. So bundle up if it's getting a little chilly, but otherwise, get out on the water, have some fun until next week. Live real life and tight lines, everybody.